The judge thought he had full control until Trump stood up and exposed the bias in front of millions. The courtroom in Phoenix, Arizona was packed, with reporters lining the back wall and camera crews waiting for a headline-worthy moment. Trump sat at the defense table, eyes locked on the judge, focused on fighting for his rights. His attorney, Mitchell Reeves, quietly reviewed documents, while the case against Trump was built on shaky grounds. The judge, Alan Whitmore, was known for his conservative bias and disdain for Trump. As the trial progressed, Trump was warned not to grandstand, but he fired back, claiming the spectacle had already been created by the judge. Whitmore's bias was evident as he nodded approvingly at the prosecution while sharply interrupting the defense. Trump remained composed, but with frustration building, he muttered under his breath, prompting Whitmore to threaten contempt. Despite the biased environment, Trump stayed calm, understanding the game was about controlling the narrative. As the prosecution continued to hammer him with accusations, the judge became more openly hostile, dismissing the defense's objections and attempting to provoke Trump into reacting. Trump resisted, knowing he was being pushed into a corner. The judge's personal animosity became undeniable, making the trial feel less like a legal proceeding and more like a staged performance. When the judge openly stated that Trump was undeserving of the benefit of the doubt, the tension in the room escalated, leaving everyone wondering how far Whitmore was willing to go. He didn't even think about it, his body just moved, and the room froze. Trump's voice was steady but carried the force of someone who had reached his limit. "Say that again?" Whitmore blinked, caught off guard by the direct challenge. "Excuse me, you just said I'm undeserving of the benefit of the doubt." Trump repeated, his voice now louder, cutting through the room like a blade. The jury exchanged glances, and even some members of the press, who weren't Trump supporters, looked surprised. Reeves stepped closer to Trump, lowering his voice, urging him to stay focused, but Trump didn't sit down, eyes still locked on the judge. Whitmore tightened his grip on the gavel, warning Trump not to grandstand. Trump dryly chuckled, calling Whitmore's behavior personal, claiming the judge had already decided the outcome. Holloway shifted uncomfortably, sensing the room's change. Trump sat back down, but the damage was done. The judge had made his first irreversible mistake. The tension shifted, and for the first time, Whitmore seemed aware his bias was exposed to a nationwide audience. Whitmore tried to regain control, telling Trump his past behavior didn't entitle him to special treatment, but Reeves immediately objected, calling it a violation of judicial impartiality. Whitmore overruled him and dismissed the defense. Trump leaned forward, challenging the judge's opinion with a calm but dangerous tone. When Holloway hesitated, Trump turned to the jury, realizing this wasn't just a trial, it was a spectacle unfolding live. Trump asked if this looked like justice, and the silence that followed confirmed it didn't. Trump's challenge had landed harder than expected, and the courtroom had shifted. Whitmore, furious, tried to regain control, but Trump continued to expose the bias, telling the judge he wasn't pretending to be neutral. The moment was already spreading online, dissected by reporters and legal experts. Trump then declared, "You're a disgrace," his calm voice cutting through the tension. Whitmore banged his gavel, but the power had shifted. Trump stood again, booming through the room, refusing to be railroaded by a corrupt judge in a corrupt trial. Whitmore hesitated, knowing removing Trump would confirm his claims, so he warned Trump one more outburst would lead to contempt. Trump laughed, mocking the judge's power, asking if he would be dragged out for calling out the truth. The room fell silent as Trump turned to address the jury, the cameras flashing like fireworks. "You see what's happening, don't you?" Trump asked, his voice steady and measured. "They want you to believe this is justice, but it's not, this is a setup. They decided the outcome before I even walked in." Judge Whitmore banged his gavel, but the room had already slipped out of his control. Reeves, still seated, urged Trump to stay smart, but Trump stood his ground. Turning to Whitmore, he asked, "If you're so confident in your case, why are you so scared of me speaking?" The silence that followed was heavy, and the trial had just turned into a national scandal. The judge, grasping his gavel tightly, couldn't respond, and Trump had exposed him. Now Whitmore had two choices: shut Trump down, which would prove his bias, or try to regain control without looking like a dictator. Whitmore chose poorly, threatening Trump with contempt, but Trump shot back, forced to what? Hold me in contempt. You think that's gonna fix this mess? Reeves stood, filing a motion for judicial recusal, accusing the judge of overwhelming bias. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, and the judge's face turned red, but he denied the motion, further fueling the chaos. A man from the gallery stood up, shouting that the trial was rigged, and the crowd reacted, calling out for justice. Trump turned to the cameras, declaring, "This is what happens when you don't play by the rules." They don't want justice, they want submission. The moment went viral, and the public began to recognize the injustice. Whitmore, now panicking, tried to control the room, but Trump smirked, knowing the world was watching. The trial had shifted, it was no longer just about legal proceedings, but a national movement. Whitmore, his authority slipping away, threatened contempt, but Trump dared him to act, challenging him to prove him right. The jury's expressions changed, and for the first time, Whitmore hesitated. Reeves seized the moment, calling for the case to be reassigned to another judge. Just as it seemed Whitmore was about to explode, a court officer handed him a slip of paper. An appellate review was already in motion. Trump folded his arms, remarking, "Looks like your time on this case is up, Judge." Outside the courthouse, the media frenzy had already begun, with headlines about the judge's bias and the trial's legitimacy. Even outlets that had criticized Trump couldn't ignore the shift. Trump walked out not as a man on trial, but as a symbol of resistance against a rigged system. At the courthouse steps, he addressed the cameras, saying, "This wasn't about me. This was about every American who's ever been silenced." The fight wasn't over, it was just beginning, and the message was clear: this wasn't just Trump's fight, it was everyone's.